For whom the tolls toll or don't toll, that's what we're thinking about today. If I got my notes correctly, in March, a judge threw out the November election that renewed the tolls for another 20 years. Then a group of citizens successfully argued that some voters had been denied the right to vote on the renewal. Toll has been suspended since that decision, but this Saturday, voters will return to vote on the toll. I think the judge ruled that it was like 1,000 voters who cast provisional ballots in the election were disenfranchised when it came to the vote itself. And the man that's been leading much of this fight, Mike Teachworth, who heads up StopTheTolls.org. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Garland. Thanks for having me.
So what's the latest? How do you think it's going to go? You have anybody take any polls to suggest what the vote may be?
Well, everyone's saying low turnout. I think it's since it's not a big election, Garland. I think it's kind of difficult to forecast what the actual turnouts could be. We did see some numbers on early voting. What that's going to translate into in the actual election, I would really say it's a guess. I think the election being on Jazz Fest, second Saturday of Jazz Fest, it definitely should be a low turnout.
And you have no idea if a low turnout or a high turnout helps or hinders you?
Well, I guess you could. There's probably two schools of thought. I mean, certainly the first turnout was on a presidential election. I tend to think, Garland, that it probably helped both sides. I think there was just a lot of votes. So I guess it's just going to determine the fors and against in the mix that shows up. So we're anxious about it. We've done everything that we can do. Garland, I think we're much better organized this time. We've certainly had a better messaging and organizational strategy. So we're hopeful. We truly believe that it's an unfair tax and that it hurts our city and our region. And so we're doing everything we can to get everyone to vote no.
Why do you think, and correct me if my memory is defective here, but I think a number of the New Orleans City Council and the mayor are for keeping the tolls. Have you ever talked with them and said, why is that?
Well, I think, I think part of it has to do with, them wanting to hold on to a revenue stream. I think they're in a situation where, certainly in the city of New Orleans, they've got a lot of obligations, and I don't think they want to see anything going. Now, interestingly enough, none of the toll money goes to the city, and the city, or really anybody in the city, since the bridge is a state asset, has really no obligation one way or the other on the bridge in terms of, the city's not going to have to pay for the bridge. It's a state obligation. So, I don't know. I would have thought with half the people against the tolls, we would have had half the politicians against the tolls, but it didn't turn out that way the first time.
The city of New Orleans gets no revenue from the tolls?
From the tolls, no. All of the toll money goes to basically goes to the state, and the state does with it what they want, and that's been our problem with it. It's a pot of money that our area, Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish primarily, contribute to, but yet we don't control it. It's controlled through a state agency, and that's been one of the big problems with it, is that only 19 cents, and really that figure, only 19 cents of every toll dollar collected even goes to the bridge. That figure's down to about 10 cents right now, Garland, with the state police taking over the patrolling of the Mississippi River Bridge, the Crescent City connection. So, that's a problem. But again, we think it's more about getting our fair share from Baton Rouge. We've paid this toll for 24 years, Garland. It's close to $450 million they've taken out of our economy. So Again, there's 10 other bridges. None of them have tolls. All of those are maintained. The state's paying for it. The state has a $25 billion budget. We're saying, look, we built the bridge. We've paid for it. Why do we have to pay this bridge tax? The people in Baton Rouge don't have to pay it, and Shreveport don't have to pay it, and Alexandria.
Do you ever get an answer to that question?
I believe it's right.
Do you ever get an answer to that question?
Well, there's been a bunch of different arguments. I have, in the 4 years that I've been crusading against this, Garland, and I was on the task force, and I've been, to multiple civic associations. I spoke to the legislature a couple times. I have never heard a single reason that justifies why we should have to pay this tax. Now, probably I would say the most valid one that I've ever heard, and it's over now, is to pay for the construction cost of the bridge, and that was actually completed in 1998 after 10 years. But then the legislature decided to kind of re-swizzle the bonds and extend them another 14 years to 2012.
All right. Let's take a break here. We're talking with Mike Teachworth. We're talking about the Saturday election. Upcoming as to whether or not we keep the tolls on the Greater New Orleans Bridge or do away with them. Mike is from the stopthetolls.org. We'll have the other side on the next half hour. Stay with us. You have questions, you have comments, text us at 870-870 or simply call us at 260-1870. Well, the first election we had on whether or not to keep or do away with the tolls on the Greater New Orleans Bridge was thrown out by a judge in March, and now we're going to have another election this Saturday. We have one side on the air with us now, Mike Teachworth of stopthetolls.org. Mike, a couple of questions. I remember the concern over we're not going to be able to afford the beautiful lights on the bridge at night. Ferries aren't going to run. Well, how's that working at this point? Are those controversies resolved, or is that still an issue?
Well, that's a good point for us to discuss. First of all, at the end of last legislative session, the state legislature passed a bill that essentially removes using the tolls to fund the ferries. The ferries have their own funding source, but it's not going to be the tolls. So that's an important thing, I think, for voters to know is that...
So that's funded.
Right. A vote against the tolls is not a vote against the ferries, and we support the ferries very much. In fact, the state funds all the other ferries but ours, and they did so before there were tolls. So we think the state should be funding our ferries, but in any event, the toll money cannot be used for the ferries.
But the ferries, you say, are funded by the legislature?
The ferries have a transition fund, and they're going to be funded. I think they got $4 million out of the one of the funds, and I think they're going to put something together to fund the ferries. But the law that was passed removed using funds for toll funds for the ferries.
Okay, so it can't use toll funds regardless.
Right, one way or the other. If the tolls, fail or renew, either way, the tolls won't be used for the ferries.
How about the lights?
Well, the lights is an interesting problem. The lights cost $47 a day. The lights. We know all that the lights got turned out and everything, and that there was $31 million in leftover toll funds available. So, and that was on top of the fact that several companies and some individuals had agreed to fund the lights. So we were disturbed by the lights getting turned out. Again, it was only the ornamental lights and not the roadway lights. But at this point, I think there's the lights aren't really the problem. I think there is a way to fund the lights. There's money, with just I think a few political moves. There's money there to pay for it. They just need to agree to do it. That's how we feel about it.
One of our texts asked, why doesn't the bridge have solar panel for their lights?
Well, we've had some people reach out to us. There was also not only solar, but the LED lights that are on the San Francisco Bridge, that they burn a lot less. electricity. They could probably get it down to, instead of $47 a day, it might even be, $10 or $15 a day, which is basically nothing. We've had other people say, Garland, why not? There were some generators that, take the flow of the water in the river. But, and that, I don't know, that's probably a question better answered by maybe the Department of Transportation and Development.
All right, if you don't mind, let's bring in some of our listeners with questions. Johnny in Algiers, you're on with Mike. Johnny?
Yeah, I'd like to know, I've been a toll tag owner since they with it back in 1989, 1990. And I pay 40 cents a trip, which I feel is reasonable. I'm for keeping the tolls, but I understand the other side's argument. But I just don't know why you would want to lose a revenue stream. I think you should go after the mismanagement of the whoever is not using the funds correctly instead of getting rid of the funding source. In every other category around the state where there's mismanagement, you go after the problem, not the source. And to say that the state's going to pay for it, I'm worried about it. I'm worried about the rumor that the fair is going to discontinue at the end of June. Being only.
Well, let's get a response. I'll let Mike respond. But one of the questions I would ask you. We haven't been able to do anything about the waste of money and corruption in it for the last 30 years or whatever. What makes you think that would change?
And that's for me, Garland, that question?
No, it's for Johnny.
I don't know. I just think that there should be some kind of way to control the spending of the money rather than just doing away with collecting the tolls because you're giving up and saying that it can't be managed.
Well, it's. I think we've been proven too, because this has been a controversy for decades. Anyway, Mike, your response.
Well, I'll just say this to you, Johnny. Even if the toll money were not being wasted and mismanaged, it's still unfair for us. Every gallon of gas that is bought in Louisiana has a 20-cent per gallon tax. That goes to fund a $2.5 billion DOTD budget. We've paid for 24 years. We're the only bridge in the state crossing the Mississippi River that has it. And, even if the money were being used perfectly, we would still argue, why do citizens in Baton Rouge get to cross their bridge? The average commuter on the Crescent City Connection, by the way, 60% of the people pay the dollar. So you should know that. They're going to pay $7,000 over the next 20 years. Our point is, why do we have to pay it when we've already been paying it, yet Baton Rouge gets it for free? The total upkeep of the bridge, just for your information, is about $4 million a year. The state has $25 billion. That's 25,000 million. They don't need to continue to toll us, or if they really are broke, which we don't believe, then put a toll on every bridge. But to take one group of people and say, you need to keep paying, we believe it's wrong, and that's why we're opposed to it. It's unfair. We're already paying taxes, and we've been paying for 24 years. So that's our response. The mismanagement of it is a separate issue. Yes, it should be rectified, and it shouldn't be mismanaged. But we don't believe that we should pay a bridge tax that other citizens don't pay. Simple as that.
I'm curious, if the tolls are taken off, are the toll booths going to be taken off, or is it just going to be because even on the Causeway, once they did away with the tolls on the South Shore, you still have only about 3 or 4 lanes going on the 2. Here you've got multiplicity of lanes going down to 2. How does the flow get regulated?
Well, we've seen a couple plans from the DOTD about how to reconfigure the lanes. And without going into too much detail, the plans that I saw had a couple lanes from the elevated West Bank Expressway that continued straight through, and then there were some other reconfigurations of the lanes. I think there was some talk of using metering in order to regulate some of the traffic that's coming at the bridge. But in many cases, there's really not all that much traffic, except really in the afternoon.
Rush
In the
hour.
morning, the traffic flows much better. In the afternoon, there's a lot of traffic on the East Bank from two places. One, the Port of New Orleans has about 300 to 400 trucks a day that clog the thoroughfare on the other side. And then the other problem is that the third lane near the New Orleans arena was closed. That causes a bit of a bottleneck. But I'm confident that when the tolls are defeated, that the DOTD is going to reconfigure it and they're going to solve the problem, and traffic's going to flow even better.
All right, let's squeeze in one more call. We literally got about a minute, Shannon. Shannon, you're on with Mike.
Hi, I was just calling to find out, is it true that the ferries are connected to the tolls or not? What's the truth?
Yeah, we talked about that a few minutes ago. The tolls, whether the tolls pass or fail, none of the toll money can be used for the ferries. The ferries are going to get their own funding source. They're getting money from the transition fund, and I think the state's working on a plan to put that together. But I think the state's going to keep those ferries running, and I think everything's going to be okay with the ferries. But the tolls, voting yes or no on the tolls has no bearing on funding the ferries at all.
Mike, as always, I appreciate you coming on the show. Had a lot of questions, got a lot of answers. Good luck to you and your organization.
Thank you, Garland.
Coming up next, we'll hear the other side. Glenn Augeron is For the Toll's board member, former president of the Algiers Economic Development.